Okay, the Hopguard, the label was not, in my opinion, clearly written, and I'm not the only researcher last year who misinterpreted the label. And I've now been working with the manufacturer. We've gone through 3 drafts of me helping them to rewrite the label, so we're going to get a clearer label out of the Hopguard. So I'm not going to even show you the results. I can tell you right now, Hopguard can work very well when there's no brood in the colony, but when there is brood, you need to repeat the applications every 2 weeks a few times. So I don't have data on that. For the oxalic towels, we started with relatively low mite colonies with those just because they were an afterthought. And the issue is you don't see that a good mite reduction with the low mite colonies as you do with high. So we got a mediocre reduction here. With the 2 oxalic sponge strips, much better, a lot more blue here, 53%. But really, it was the 2 sponges that really look good. And Ken, I'll let you look at this one right here. So this started with a over 70 right here. Can you tell the audience what the ending mite count was right there?
Looks like 0. Or...
That would be a 0. If you don't see red, that is 0. So you look at these spectacularly high mite counts, colonies that you would expect to crash, and yet they not only survived, but the oxalic and glycerin took them down to 0s down here. Wow. So down to 10% of the starting count. Best control of anything I test. And when we do the calculations for efficacy, I like to use the Henderson-Tilton formula, which compares the controls at 0. And 2 different ways of calculating them. They're both pretty much the same, but the oxalic acid 2 sponges were the best mite control of any of the treatments that I tested. Now, one of the questions I had, would putting in these 2 strips with 50 grams of oxalic acid between them harm the brood? And Ken, I'll let you give me an assessment. What would be your opinion of the amount of harm to the brood right here?
It looks really good to me.
Yes, especially these colonies started with very high mite levels, that the brood looked better after treatment than it did before. Now, here's where it got interesting. Independent of that trial, we tried a lot of other hives. We had 3 of these yards up in the High Sierra at 6,500 feet, working with some grad students from universities in California. They were studying native pollinators and honeybee interaction, so they asked us to supply the hives up there. And we took the hives up. First, it was a whole different thing there. They made a honey crop up there and huge pollen flow, so there was no brood rearing, no drone brood rearing in the other trial. In this trial, those colonies just packed on the drones, which means with all that mite counts at a high elevation should have just exploded over the summer. The other thing was those grad students have been monitoring all the pollens on the flowers prior to our arrival, and there were 0 honeybees, which means there were no other beehives anywhere in the vicinity, so no possibility of mite coming in from other hives. This turns out possibly to be a big thing. Here's yard A. Let me see. This is after 63 days. So what we did, we threw the treatment in, took them up there, or we took them up there and threw the treatment in, and then left them alone for 2 months. And the ones that had low mite counts, we put in 1 strip, and the high mite counts, we put in 2 strips. So we got lots of blue here, pretty good mite control. That's just for one of the yards. Now with
Randy, that was OAE?
Yeah, extended release, the same thing,
Okay.
Same sponges. Look at these. When the boys brought these back, so this was after 77 days during the nectar flow with drone ring the whole time, 77 days, we unloaded the trucks. The boys went up and brought the truck back, and the next day when the bees had calmed down, I said, oh, I got to see what the mite counts are. You know, there's 77 days up there with all this drone ring, and some of them had started with very high mite counts. So I'm doing all this, shaking the samples, and Eric's running the agitator, recording the mite washes. And after a while, I said, so Eric, you're not talking. How are they looking? He says, Dad, I've never seen so many 0s in a row.
Yes.
I mean, look at the distinct absence of red on these. Just absolute spectacular mite control. We also had one other isolated yard up in the state of Nevada where we do a pumpkin pollination. And usually the colonies, because the boys want to drop them off early, then they want to wait until just before Halloween to pick them up, so they go pick up free pumpkins for Halloween. So they just ignore those hives up there, and they usually come back just full of mites and in terrible shape. And this year they came back with big smiles on their faces. The hives were chock full of honey. Got a really and we did the mite counts. I just went through the first 10 of them, and I got, I think, 9 zeros and a 1. So it's just unbelievable mite control if you don't have drift coming in from other hives.
Wow. When is this going to be approved then?
Well, you're going to ask me that one later. Okay. So now we also, in those other trials I showed you, we also use the sponges. And when the hives were in nukes, we either put a quarter strip, a little tiny strip, over a top bar, or laid across the frames if they were in 2 boxes high. You have to have the exposure of the bees to the strips. And so this would be our June count, would be the blue, and then our follow-up count, this would be in 20th of July. Pretty good looking mite control. 20th of July. This was September 4th, from June to September 4th. And again, it just took all those mite counts down and just held them down beautifully. So the thing is, these were small amounts. These were like 12.5 gram strips rather than the 50 gram strips. But by putting them in early, we were happy. It wasn't until September that we started seeing the mite count start to rise again. Now, this is California conditions. Mm-hmm. So it's a long-term treatment, and it works best where there's little mite immigration. And so in that 42, after the 42-day count in the first trial, I left some in there to see if these doubles go down, and sure enough, they do keep going down. So this is, you're in for the long haul on this, and it takes a while. So here's an observation of interest. This is some data from 2018, where I was testing a whole bunch of different ratios of oxalic acid to glycerin, but I was doing mite drop. So these are our normalized mite drop, and the green dotted line is the baseline value. So when I put so here's our baseline. When I put the sponges in, these are shop towels, we went up 15 times the baseline mite drop on some of these formulations. But notice they don't drop down below the baseline until a month later. They just keep dropping mites at a high rate above the starting baseline count for a full month. I also took alcohol wash counts at the same time throughout here. Then I would have expected, if they're dropping mites like crazy for that month, that the alcohol wash counts would also go down. But as you can see, that's not what happened. The mite alcohol wash counts went up, and they stayed up for almost a month. And that just made no sense at all to me whatsoever. So the only way, my only explanatory hypothesis is this oxalic acid and glycerin is messing with the mites' ability to find their way back into cells to reproduce, and they stay out on the adult bees. So the mite wash count of the adult bees goes up. And because they're not reproducing, eventually the whole mite population of the hive goes down to close to 0. So I don't know if I have time to, I don't know if you guys are noticing, but my voice is getting hoarse. I just was diagnosed with a cancer in my tongue, and I start chemotherapy and radiation in 2 weeks. So this is one of the last presentations I'll be doing because my voice is about to go out right here. So one of the questions I had is, when I looked at these sponges after the 70 days, they still have plenty of oxalic acid, and very easy to tell. You just taste them. So I weighed a bunch of them and then calculated out that only a fraction of the oxalic acid was ever released. So it said 50 grams, only maybe 5 or 10 grams ever was released from the sponges to the bees. So it's not how much you put in, which goes out onto the bees.
And Randy,
and the reason apparently that the 2 sponge treatment worked better was because of the surface area rather than the amount of oxalic acid. Yeah, Ken.
And those are actually wet, right? I mean, they're moist.
They're
Those,
not when we put them in, but the glycerin absorbs moisture from the hive humidity, and a day after you put them in, then they look moist.
okay.
So they look pretty dry. The ratio I use, the 1-to-1 ratio, looks dry because the oxalic acid crystallizes. But when the uh, glycerin then absorbs moisture, then that dissolves some of the oxalic acid for the slow release.
Nice.
So one question is, why did Jerry's trials in Georgia not have as good efficacy? And we were wondering whether it was humidity. So Soren Robert in Virginia tested it. He got a permit and tested it, and in high humidity in Georgia, in Virginia, he got 88% efficacy. Then this study was just published. I was down in Veracruz, Mexico, a few years ago, instructing beekeepers. I took this photograph. Notice they all have ant guards on the of their stands.
Mm-hmm.
Does this look like a high humidity area to you guys? This is like tropical jungle down there. They got 88% efficacy down there, so it's not a humidity issue. And based upon my results of the drift-free areas, that the Georgia trials did not look so good was because of mite drift from other hives.
Gotcha.
So now what I'm doing, I'm testing different. I got over a dozen different matrices to test this coming year. The sponges were an improvement over the shop towels, and there may be matrices that are improvement over the sponges.
It's 8 o'clock.
And what I'm going to do is I developed this technique a year ago, and I have just been too damn busy with research to follow up on this. So I'm ready this spring, if this chemotherapy doesn't knock me on my ass too bad, to put these treatments in the hives. And now sit down next to a hive, and with this apparatus, this tray right here on my lap, treat a hive with oxalic acid, and then pick bee combs, drop them into this. First, I adjust this color of this 5 milliliters of distilled water to this pH of 6. Drop a bee in, and if there's any oxalic acid on the bee's body, it will shift towards orange, the color towards orange. So this one shifted over to the pH of 4 right here. Then I can drip in titrant, 1 drop at a time, until I change this color back to blue. And when it gets back to the original color, by the number of drops, I can tell oxalic acid was on that bee's body down to the microgram, to the millionth of a gram. Yeah, and it takes about 15 seconds just sitting there next to do each one. It's just absolutely amazing to see how accurate this is. I've done it after oxalic acid dribble, and boy, it's just an hour after you dribble, those bees have a high amount of oxalic acid on their bodies. I've checked it twice after vaporization, and I couldn't even detect oxalic acid on the bee's body. So I need to follow up on that and figure out why that was. I even went down and found dead bees on the bottom board after vaporization. Half of them had oxalic acid on their bodies. So I'm not sure where that oxalic goes with the vaporization.
Wow.
So right now I can tell you, we've used a lot of acid treatments. Let's see. Some beekeepers I know, they buy their formic acid by the 55-gallon drum. How's that?
Wow.
and I've been around to see how much they use, and so I have lots of experience with formic acid. I have lots of experience with oxalic acid, and with vaporization, we've tested that. This is the safest of all the acid treatments I've ever seen. This application of these pads like this. We carry baking soda with us, 10 heaping tablespoons per gallon. This will immediately neutralize either formic acid or oxalic acid on your hands, on your hive tools, your clothing, any place where you might get it, the smoker. So with that, very easy to neutralize it. And even if you were to pick these sponges up barehanded, you wouldn't even notice a thing. You just don't want to rub your eyes, and you want to neutralize it before you take a leak or something like that, because it does stick to your fingers. But as far as any burning, you don't get any burning at all from this in the short term. And for making them, these are the smaller strips. If you put 80 of these strips in a shoe tub and mix 1,000 grams of oxalic acid with 1,000 grams of glycerin, heat it up, just pour it over it, just suck it right up. There's no residue left, and they're ready to go. Very, very simple.
Wow.
Again, this is only for experiment. I think it's going to be a game changer for varroa management for beekeepers everywhere. I'm being widely followed throughout the world. And in answer to your question, I sent a list of beekeepers' questions to Dr. J. Evans, letting him know that he had some time to find out the answers from the USDA, answering all those questions, and they are going to be are published in the American Bee Journal. And he had 3 months to do it, and I told him afterwards, Jay, you've really learned how to speak bureaucratese very, very, very well by answering questions without actually saying anything. And all my research is supported by donations from beekeepers, and I appreciate that. You can just donate at my website. I get checks and stuff, but that allows me to spend the money, and like I'm going to reimburse my son for the losses of the control group in the pollen trial, because not a single one of them made it to almonds or will make any nukes. So that's a big financial hit for them. That will come out of my donations to reimburse them.